Hi everyone, now you're watching my channel. All the content I create myself, new videos every day, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot. Thanks, bye!
You don't belong here!
You just made a huge mistake.
The moment Dara Mitchell stepped through the sliding glass doors of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the terminal swallowed her whole. Gates hummed with the shuffle of rolling luggage and intercom calls. A child cried somewhere near a water fountain. The smell of coffee and jet fuel hung in the recycled air. She moved through it all with a kind of stillness that didn't ask for attention. It simply occupied space. She wore a fitted black blazer over a silk ivory blouse, dark trousers pressed to a clean line. Her suitcase was custom matte black with awesome band of brushed gold along the trim. Small, distinctive, impossible to mistake. She had bought it in London 3 years before she had any real reason to travel there. Before the funds, before the deals, before any of this. The Apex Airways counter came into view. 2 agents stood behind it, neither looking up until Dara was close enough for them to register what they saw. The woman on the SAF, Stacy Brennan, had the kind of smile that arrived a half-second too late. She straightened, glanced once at her colleague, with an expression that wasn't eyes on Dara, with an expression that wasn't quite a frown and wasn't quite a welcome. She said. The warmth in her voice was a performance. Dara slid, the first class boarding pass, across the counter. Good morning. Stacy picked it up. She looked at it. She looked at Dara. Then she looked at the ticket again, tilting it slightly under the light as if she were reading Feynman print that hadn't been there a moment before. One moment, Stacy said, and turned toward Travis Cole, the agent at the adjacent station. She said nothing out loud. She didn't have to. The slight dip of her chin, the angle of her eyes in Dara's direction, the barely there lift at the corner of her mouth. Travis reached over and took the ticket. He held it up at a slight angle, the way someone does when they suspect a document might be counterfeit. Dara stood still. Her hands rested on the counter. She did not drum her fingers. She did not sigh. She had learned a long time ago that stillness, in moments like this, was its own kind of power. You could not rattle a woman who had already decided nothing here could rattle her. Travis handed the ticket back with a small shrug. Stacy returned to Dara with the same delayed smile. Have a great flight. Dara took the ticket without looking at either of them. She moved toward the luggage drop, and as the distance between her and the counter grew, she heard it. Travis, low but entirely audible, leaning toward Stacy. First class. Someone Sumsa got real lucky. Stacy's quiet laugh followed. Dara heard every syllable. She did not turn around. Not because she couldn't think of a response. She had 100 responses. She had been preparing them since she was 19 years old, and a department store manager had followed her through the coat section without saying a word. She simply chose not to spend them here. Not yet. At the luggage drop, a man in a rumpled Apex uniform was working the belt with the mechanical indifference of someone 3 hours past caring. His name badge read, Doug. He didn't look at Dara. He barely looked at the luggage. He grabbed the handle of her suitcase and swung it upward in a single arc, releasing it before it had fully cleared the rim of the belt. It landed on its side with a sound that made the woman behind Dara flinch. The smaller leather bag that had been nestled against it skidded sideways. The zipper split open and looked along one end. Excuse me. Her voice was level. Could you please handle that with a bit more care? Doug glanced at her, not at the bag. At her as if the request itself was the offense. It's luggage, he said. It goes where it goes. He scooped up the smaller bag one-handed and dropped it onto the belt beside the suitcase. Dara watched the belt carry both pieces away and disappear behind the rubber flap. She exhaled once through her nose, slow, controlled. The kind of breath that a therapist had once told her was a way of choosing not to let someone else's smallness define the next 5 minutes of your life. Her phone vibrated in her jacket pocket. She pulled it out. A message from Gina Park. Her assistant. Acquisition finalized, documents transmitted. Board confirmed 9 a.m. tomorrow. Dara read it once, then put the phone away. She picked up her carry-on, adjusted the strap across her shoulder, and walked toward the gate. Her heels made a clean sound against the polished floor. Around her, the airport moved at its usual speed. No one was watching, no one knew. and that, for now, was exactly how she needed it. She had. Now maybe less. The walk to the gate was long enough to notice things. Dara had learned that about airports, that they were excellent places to observe people when no one thought they were being observed. A father lifting his toddler over a puddle near a water fountain. Two elderly women sharing a single magazine across armrests. A businessman walking with his eyes locked on his phone, nearly stepping into a cleaning cart. Small, human ones. She noticed them because she had trained herself to. In the early years, when the meetings were long and the rooms were quiet in a way that made her feel specifically invisible, she had held on to those kinds of details like anchors. They reminded her that the world was wider than whatever corner of it was trying to make her feel small. Gate B14 came into view. The departure board above it read Atlanta to Chicago, boarding in 22 minutes. A handful of passengers had already gathered near the seating area. Dara found a seat at the end of the row with a clear left line to the gate podium and the floor-to-ceiling windows beyond it. Outside, she could see the runway, the distant silhouettes of planes taxiing in the pale morning light. She opened her phone and scrolled through the emails that had accumulated since before dawn. The Apex acquisition had generated a chain of follow-up correspondence across 4 different law firms and 2 financial advisors, and she had read most of it the night before in the hotel somewhere around 2 in the morning when sleep had stopped feeling like a real option. The numbers were right. The terms were right. The timing was the only thing that had given anyone pause. Her lead attorney, Marcus Webb, had told her 3 weeks ago, "The board will approve it, but they'll do it the way they always do. Quietly, quickly, and without any particular fanfare." He had been right. The announcement was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Coordinated press release, no leaks. Until then, she was simply a woman with a first-class ticket. She looked up from the phone as the gate agents arrived. Phil Marsh came first, setting his bag under the podium with the efficiency of a man who did the same thing in the same order every morning. He was followed by Tony Reeves, who dropped into the adjacent chair and immediately stretched his legs out with the comfort of someone who owned the space. Dara watched them without leaning forward. Phil pulled up the boarding manifest. Tony said something she couldn't. Phil laughed, short and practiced, the kind of laugh that comes from a long-standing rhythm between two people. She turned back to her phone. When the boarding call came for first-class passengers, Dara stood, gathered her carry-on, and walked to the podium. Phil looked up. She extended her boarding pass. He took it, scanned it, and then held it for a beat longer than was necessary. His eyes moved from the screen to her, then back. "Just double-checking," he said. "We've had some confusion with boarding passes lately." "There's no confusion," Dara said. Phil's expression remained professionally neutral, though something moved beneath it. He handed the pass back. "Have a good flight." She stepped down the jet bridge. Behind her, she heard Phil's voice drop, addressed to Tony. "Bet she didn't pay for that herself." Tony's answer came after a short pause. "Sugar Daddy special." The words hit the back of her neck like cold air. She kept walking. The jet bridge was narrow and slightly inclined, and her heels made no sound on the carpet. She counted her own breaths. 1, 2, 3. The sound of Phil's voice faded. She had heard variations of that sentence in airport lounges and hotel lobbies and conference room hallways for 20 years. It never got easier. What changed was the weight you assigned to it. She had stopped letting it settle. She had learned to let it pass through and keep moving. The plane waited at the end of the bridge, and so did everything else. The interior of the aircraft smelled like recycled air and faint traces of the cleaning crew's work from the previous flight. Dara stepped through the door and turned left without hesitation. First class, 4 rows of wide leather seats in a 2x2 configuration, most still empty. The overhead compartment above seat 2A was closed. She reached for it. "Ma'am." The voice came from her right, a flight attendant in a pressed Apex uniform, clipboard in hand, Claire Donovan. Her expression was arranged into something that could have passed for professional concern. Dara paused, hand still raised. "May I see your pass?" Claire asked. It was just scanned at the gate, standard procedure for first class, just to confirm. Claire's voice was smooth and even. She was good at this, at rapping something that wasn't quite right in sign language, that sounded perfectly reasonable. Dara lowered her hand, purporting retrieve the boarding pass from her jacket pocket. Claire looked at it, looked at Dara, looked at the pass again. Her finger traced the seat number slowly. You're in 2A? Yes. Just wanted to be sure we have everything sorted. Claire handed the pass back and stepped aside exactly enough to let Dara through no more. Dara opened the overhead compartment, stowed her carry-on, and settled into her seat. From the corner of her eye, she saw Rick Stanton at the galley entrance. He was watching. When Claire passed him on her way back toward the cabin door, he leaned in and said something low. Claire's chin dipped slightly. Rick glanced toward Dara's row, then looked away. She had seen that exact choreography before. The small, fast exchange that was meant to look like nothing. The mutual acknowledgement that didn't need words because Popple already understood what was being communicated. She recognized it the way she recognized the sound of her own name being said in the next room. She opened the book she had pulled from her carry-on. She did not actually read it. Her eyes moved across the lines, but the words did not register. Her attention was divided between the page and the awareness of the space around her, the sounds, the movement, the temperature of the room. Other passengers filtered in. A couple in their late 60s who smiled at each other over the seat between them. A man in a gray suit who immediately put on headphones and reclined his seat before the doors had even closed. A woman with a toddler who hesitated at the first-class curtain before an attendant guided her further back. When the cabin doors sealed, Dara set her book down and looked out the window. Below on the tarmac, the ground crew was finishing their pre-departure work. Fuel trucks retreating. Orange-vested workers directing the pushback tug. And then she saw it, her suitcase. The matte black with the gold trim, distinctive from 30 feet away. A ground crew member had it on the edge of a luggage cart, gripping it by the handle. He lifted it over simply his head with both arms, and then he simply let it drop. Not placed, not set, dropped. It hit the metal bed of the cart, with a sound she couldn't hear through the pressurized window but could feel in her chest. The impact was hard enough to see the entire cart shudder slightly. The zipper on the left side panel, already compromised from Doug's handling a check, came fully open. The flap lifted and pressed back down loosely. Dara pressed the call button above her head. Rick appeared within seconds, which told her he had been nearby. His expression was the face of a man who had already decided this conversation would be brief. "Yes, ma'am." She pointed toward the window. "That's my luggage. The black bag with gold trim. They just dropped it and the side zipper is open." Rick leaned slightly toward the window, squinting as though the view required significant effort to interpret. "The ground team handles hundreds of bags per flight. It's damage," Dara said. "I'll make a note." He straightened and turned to leave. The dismissal was so practiced it almost had a rhythm to it. She had been dismissed with that exact tone in boardrooms, in restaurants, in hotel lobbies, in 100 other places where she had been the only person who looked like her. She said nothing further. She turned back to the window. Her hand rested flat on the armrest, her thumb pressed against the leather until the knuckle went white, and then she released it, one thing at a time. Dara waited until the seatbelt sign clicked off before she stood again. Not because she had to, because she wanted the moment to mean something when it arrived. She pressed the call button. Rick came with the same expression he had worn before, slightly tighter this time. She could see in the set of his jaw that he had already categorized her as a problem to be managed. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she said. "We're in the middle of pre-departure service." "I understand that. I'm still requesting to speak to your supervisor." Rick took one measured step closer, lowering his voice in the way people do when they want to make a public situation feel private. "Ma'am, my suggestion is that we address this after landing, when we have more time and resources to. My luggage is visibly damaged, and your response was to turn around and walk away. I don't think waiting for landing is a reasonable suggestion." Across the aisle, a man in a charcoal suit had stopped pretending to look at his phone. He was watching openly now. In the row behind him, a woman had turned slightly in her seat. Dara noticed. She didn't move her gaze from Rick. "She's right," the man in the charcoal suit said. Zoit's was clear and even, not aggressive, just factual. "Same airline lost half my gear last month. Filed a report at the gate and nothing came of it." A woman 2 rows back added quietly but audibly, They should handle this now. Rick's composure held, but only barely. His eyes swept the first-class cabin with the look of someone recalibrating. One passenger speaking up was manageable. 2 was a pattern. 3 was a moment. "Ma'am," he said to Dara, the word arriving with a slight edge now. "I'd appreciate it if we kept this professional and didn't create a scene." The word hit the air and stayed there. Dara's voice, when it came, was absolutely controlled. "I'm standing in my assigned seat, speaking in a measured tone, asking that my property be treated with the same standard applied to everyone on this aircraft. That's not a scenes, that's a reasonable request from a paying passenger." She paused just long enough for the silence to mean something, but if it feels like a scene, maybe that tells us something about what you were expecting from me. The cabin was very quiet. The man in the charcoal suit made a short sound that might have been approval. 2 passengers had their phones out, not raised to record anything overtly but positioned. Claire appeared at the Gallipoli seconds, reading the room in about 3 seconds. She walked to Rick's side and said something near his ears. Rick's expression shifted. He stepped back. Claire addressed Dara directly, her voice softer now, smoother. "I sincerely apologize for any distress this has caused. I'll personally ensure an incident report is filed and that your luggage is inspected upon landing." She paused. "Can I get you anything in the meantime? Water? A meal?" "No," Dara said. "Thank you." She sat back down. In the galley, barely audible over the soft hum of the engines. Now winding up toward takeoff, she heard Claire say to Rick, "She'll probably file something with customer relations." Rick's response was just above a murmur. "Let her. Nobody's going to lose sleep over a complaint about a suitcase." Dara heard it. She folded her hands in her lap and looked out the window as the plane began to move. The tarmac scrolled slowly past. The Atlanta skyline grew smaller. The engines built to a roar, and then the ground fell away. She did not reach for her phone. Not yet. She simply watched the earth shrink beneath the wings, and she thought about patience. How long she had carried it. How quietly it had been working all this time, building towards something that come tomorrow morning these 5 people would understand completely. Cruising altitude. 37,000 feet. The city was gone, and below them there was only cloud and the flat gray light of a Midwestern morning spreading in every direction. Dara had set her book back in her bag. The cabin had settled into its mid-flight rhythm. Its mid-flight rhythm. The couple in first class were sharing earbuds, leaned together over a phone screen. The man in the suit had fallen asleep with his mouth slightly open. A woman Dara had noticed at boarding was reviewing documents on a tablet. Her highlighter cap clicked between her fingers in a steady, unconscious rhythm. The service cart came through. A young male attendant with careful hair and an immaculate uniform worked his way down the aisle. He smiled at the couple. He offered a second drink to the man in the suit, who didn't stir but got a gentle shoulder pat anyway. He paused at the row directly ahead of Dara, bending slightly to ask the woman with the tablet if she needed anything. He reached Dara's row and the warmth dimmed. Not all the way, just enough. "Anything for you?" he asked, his eyes aimed somewhere past her shoulder. "No, thank you." He nodded, already moving on. She watched him stop 2 rows back to laugh at something a passenger had said. She watched the ease of it, the natural body language of someone who was exactly where he expected to be, doing exactly what he expected to do. It wasn't malice in him. She had learned to recognize the difference. Malice was deliberate. What he had done was reflex, the automatic turning down of attention in a direction that something in his training or his environment or his entire life had told him didn't require it. That didn't make it not real. Rick came through a few minutes later, pausing at the first-class divider to speak with Claire. Their conversation lasted perhaps 30 seconds. At one point, Rick glanced toward Dara's row. She didn't look away when he did it. He looked back at Claire. She had been patient for a long time, not passive. There was a difference between those 2 things that people often failed to understand. Patience was the ability to hold still without surrendering the position. Passive was accepting whatever came at you as though nothing else were possible. She had never been passive. She had chosen 100 times in 100 different rooms when to move and when to wait, because timing was everything, and premature action only gave people the satisfaction of dismissing you before you were ready. She was nearly ready. Rick returned from the forward galley, carrying a small tray of glasses. He distributed them to the first-class passengers, row by row. The couple, the man in the suit, now awake, the woman with the tablet. He moved through all of them with the automatic fluid attention of professional service. He skipped Dara's row entirely. Not by accident, she tracked him. There was no hesitation in his path, no moment where he almost turned toward her and redirected. He passed her as though the row was empty. Later, as the descent announcement came through and the cabin prepared for landing, Rick came down the aisle once more with the feedback cards. He stopped at each seat. He made eye contact with each passenger. He thanked the couple for flying with them. He told the man in the suit he hoped the flight had been comfortable. He offered a card to Dara with the flat efficiency of a man completing a checklist, barely pausing before he pivoted to the man across the aisle from her with a full transformation. Open expression, genuine voice. Hope we made your trip a good one, sir. Dara held the card. She read it without expression, then she set it face down on the tray table. She reached into her jacket and held her phone in her palm without unlocking it. She already knew what was on it. She had read the final confirmation 4 times. Everything was in order. The documents were filed. The board had ratified the vote. As of 6:47 that morning, Dara Mitchell held a controlling stake in Apex Airways. The wheels of the aircraft met the runway with a clean jolt. Outside, the Chicago skylines appeared between low clouds, gray and sharp and familiar. The cabin applauded. She didn't. Her phone buzzed. Gina, 2 words. They're ready. Dara looked out the window one last time. Then she unlocked the screen. It was time. Dara was among the last to leave the aircraft. She had let the other first-class passengers go ahead. Not because she was in no hurry, but because she wanted to arrive at the right moment rather than the first available one. The jet bridge was cool and slightly dimly lit, the carpet absorbing the sound of her footsteps. She walked at her usual pace, unhurried. By the time she emerged into the terminal, the rest of the flight had dispersed into the main flow of traffic, their faces already blurring into the crowd. She stood still for a moment and let her eyes adjust. Near the luggage claim carousel, she saw them. Stacy Brennan, Travis Cole, Doug Hendricks. All 3 still in their Apex uniforms, standing a few feet apart from each other. With the posture of people who had been told to wait somewhere, Stacy was looking at her, sure why. Stacy was looking at her phone. Travis had his arms folded. Doug stood with his weight on one leg, staring at the middle distance. 5 feet away from them, facing the opposite direction, stood a group of 5 people of business attire, 2 women, 3 men. Their suits were the kind that communicated something without trying to. One of the men, tall, silver-haired, standing slightly in front of the others, turned at the sound of her approach. Nathan Weller. She recognized him from the 6 months of acquisition documents, board meeting transcripts, and 2 video calls that had been necessary to get this far. He was in his late 50s with the bearing of someone who had spent 30 years learning when to speak and when to listen. He saw her and began walking to meet her, covering the distance quickly with a hand already extended. Miss Mitchell. His handshake was firm and warm, and he held eye contact. It's a genuine honor. Likewise, she said. He gestured toward the group behind him. The team is assembled. We're ready whenever you are. She nodded, and then, before turning to follow him, she let her gaze travel the short distance to where Stacy, Travis, and Doug were standing. She looked at each of them in turn. 3 or 4 seconds, no more. Not threatening, not triumphant. Just clear. Stacy noticed first. Her eyes tracked from Dara to Nathan to the executive team behind him and back to Dara. The phone in her hand lowered slowly. Travis's uncrossed. His arms, Doug's 1,000-yard stare refocused. Nathan turned to the group with the ease of a man making an introduction at a board meeting. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had made difficult announcements before and understood that the prepper scene mattered more than the delivery. Stacy, Travis, Doug. He paused until all 3 of them were looking at him. I'd like you to meet Dara Mitchell. She is the new majority owner of Apex Airways, effective as of 6:47 this morning. The carousels hummed behind them. Somewhere in the distance, a child was crying, and intercom announcements echoed and faded. Stacy's mouth. Nothing, no came out. Travis's face went through several things in rapid succession. Confusion first, then, nice ass and recognition. then something that landed closer to dread. Doug looked at the floor. Dara watched it all happen without changing her expression. She had imagined this moment. She had thought about what she would feel. Satisfaction, she had assumed, maybe something harder. But standing here, watching these three people absorb the full weight of what their morning had meant, what she felt was quieter than she had expected. Not forgiveness, not triumph. Something more like the sensation of a debt being entered into the ledger, not paid, just acknowledged. She nodded once at Nathan. "Shall we find somewhere private to talk?" He gestured to the corridor. "Conference room is ready," they walked. And behind her, she could hear nothing from the three of them. No words, no shuffling, just the specific silence of people standing very still inside, a moment they did not know how to leave. She did not look back. The conference room was a rectangle of glass and gray carpet tucked between the terminal's business lounge and a service corridor. It had the functional anonymity of every airport meeting room Dara had ever been in. A long table, 8 chairs, a whiteboard with old marker still faintly visible on the surface. The overhead a flat neutral. There was nowhere to hide in it. Nathan stood at the head of the table. The executive team arranged themselves along one side. Stacy, Travis, Doug, Phil, and Rick had been brought in by an Apex HR representative, a composed woman named Helen, who had clearly done this before. They sat in a row on the opposite side, not quite in a line, their shoulders angled inward as though trying to take up less space. Dara stood at the far end. She had not taken a seat. She let the room settle for a moment, not theatrically, just long enough for everyone to stop moving and start listening. "I want to begin by being specific," she said. Her voice was the same voice she had used all morning, even, unhurried, not general, specifics. She looked at Stacy. "When I presented my first-class boarding pass at the check-in counter, you picked it up and passed it to your colleague without a word." He held it towards the ceiling light. "You have done that with other passengers this morning. I will tell you clearly, you have not." Stacy's jaw tightened. Her eyes were already red. Dara turned to Travis. "You received the pass from her and examined it as though its authenticity was in question. You handed it back with a shrug and said, 'When you thought I was far enough away to not hear, first class. Someone got real lucky. I was not far enough away.'" Travis said nothing. He was looking at the table, Doug. She turned. "You threw my suitcase onto the check-in belt, hard enough that a secondary bag fell to the floor and a zipper separated. When I asked you to handle it more carefully, you told me it was just luggage and it goes where it goes. I want to be sure we're going to describe that as an accident." Doug's jaw worked. "No," he said finally, barely audible. "That was not an accident." She moved her gaze to Phil. "You scanned my boarding pass twice, made a comment about confusion with tickets that no one else in line experienced, and then said to your colleague after I had passed, quote, 'Bet she didn't pay for that herself.'" She paused. Your colleague responded,
I heard both of you.
Phil's face had gone the color of chalk. He nodded once, stiffly. She looked at Rick last. He was sitting with his arms on the table and his hands clasped. His expression was the most controlled of the 5, but the control itself was the tell. He was working too hard at it. "You dismissed my concern about damaged luggage with one sentence and turned away. When I asked for a supervisor, you told me not to cause a scene." After Claire intervened, "You told her in the galley that nobody would lose sleep over a complaint about a suitcase. Later in the flight, you passed my row without offering service that you extended to every other first-class passenger. You gave me a feedback card, and then immediately addressed the man he sat across the aisle, as you, though I had ceased to exist." She let that sit for a moment. "I'm telling you all of this not to humiliate you," she said. "I want you to understand exactly what's happened today, because when we discuss what comes next, I want there to be no ambiguity about what we're actually talking about." Nathan spoke, effective immediately. "All 5 of you are suspended from duty pending a full disciplinary review. You will be contacted by HR within 48 hours with next steps." His voice was measured and final. Stacy made a small sound, her hand pressed to her mouth. Travis had not looked up from the table. Doug nodded at the floor as though he had expected this. Phil stared at the wall. Rick met Dara's eyes for the first time. She didn't look away. He did. "I want to say something else," Dara said, and the room went very still. "I have been in spaces like this one for most of my professional life. Rooms where I was the only person who looked like me. Boardrooms, airport lounges, conference calls where someone always seemed surprised I was there. I have been questioned, underestimated, looked through and spoken about as though I couldn't hear. She paused. What happened today was not new. What is new is the position I'm standing in while I say this. She looked across the table at all 5 of them. I am not going to ask you to feel guilty. Guilt is for your own conscience to manage. What I am asking is that you understand the weight of what you put on another person this morning. Someone you knew nothing about. Someone who had done nothing to earn that treatment. That understanding is the only thing that will make any of this worth something. Helen rose and indicated that the 5 were free to leave. They filed out. Stace last, and as she passed the door, she looked back once. Dara held her gaze until the door closed. Nathan exhaled quietly. I'm sorry, Miss Mitchell. I know, she said. Now let's talk about what we do with it. They stayed in the conference room for another 40 minutes. Nathan had brought printed copies of a preliminary reform plan that his operations director had been developing since Dara's legal team had first made contact 7 weeks ago. She read it while they talked. She asked questions that he did not always have complete answers to, and she respected him more for admitting it than she would have if he had invented certainty. The plan covered 3 areas. First, a full audit of passenger complaint data from the past 3 years, broken down by race, seat class, and route to identify patterns that internal reporting had likely missed or buried. Second, mandatory bias awareness training for all customer-facing staff, not the 45-minute video module that currently passed as training, but a redesigned curriculum built with input from outside consultants who were not currently on the Apex payroll. Third, an anonymous reporting channel for passengers, separate from the existing feedback system, to ensure that complaints went somewhere other than the department of the people being complained about. Dara had come to this meeting prepared to push hard for all 3. She was surprised, cautiously, to find Nathan pushing alongside her. The audit was something I wanted to do 2 years ago, he said, setting down his copy of the plan. I was told the data wasn't structured in a way that made it workable. I accepted that. I shouldn't have. No, she said. You shouldn't have. Without flinching, you'll have full access to everything. Finance, operations, HR records, union agreements. If there are structural things that have been enabling this, I want them found. They will be, she said, She looked through the glass wall of the conference room at the terminal beyond. Travelers moved in every direction, pulling bags, checking phones, looking up at departure boards. Ordinary motion, the entire architecture of flight, tickets and gates and crews and schedules, built to move people from one place to another with some basic approximation of safety and dignity. The gap between the architecture and morning living inside of. She thought of the woman at the check-in counter after Stacy had cleared Dara's ticket. She had watched from a distance and done nothing. She thought of the passengers who had been in line when Doug threw the suitcase and had looked away. She thought of the man on the aircraft who had finally spoken up, the small and significant courage of that, the way it had changed the temperature in the cabin for half a minute. People could do the right thing. It was not a naive conclusion. It was an observed one. The conditions for it just had to be created and maintained, which was harder, slower work than a press conference. I want to be involved in the curriculum redesign, she said, not as an overseer. As a contributor, I'm going to bring in 3 organizations that do this work properly. We'll assess what we build against actual outcomes, not completion rates. Nathan nodded, agreed. I'd also like a review mechanism at the 18-month mark. Not just a report, an independent assessment from a third party with no financial relationship to the airline. Dara set the plan down. She looked at him. Why didn't you know us this morning before I called? He was quiet for a moment. Because the system isn't set up to surface it. Complaints go to station managers. Station managers decide what escalates. Most of this morning would have been logged as a handled passenger interaction and closed. That changes. Yes, he said. That changes. She stood. Nathan stood. They shook hands again, and this time it felt different from the first one in the terminal. The first had been introductory. This one had weight to it. The beginning of something that was going to require both of them to show up. The press tumultuous, he said, walking with her to the door. Is there anything you soon include beyond what we've drafted? She thought for a moment. Tell them who I am before you tell them what I'm doing. Not my credentials. Who I am. She paused. People need to understand that this isn't policy from the outside. It's a decision from someone who was on that plane this morning. He nodded. I understand. She walked out into the terminal, and the world came back at full volume. The hotel was 12 minutes from the airport. Dara had booked a standard room. Her assistant Gina had tried twice in the weeks leading up to this trip to upgrade her to a suite, and both times Dara had declined. She had her reasons, and they were not about money. She set her carry-on the luggage rack and sat on the edge of the bed. The room was clean and ordinary. A window faced a parking structure. Somewhere outside, a horn sounded and faded. She reached into her jacket and set her phone on the nightstand and looked at it for a moment without picking it up. The suitcase would be delivered to the room once the airline had arranged its inspection. Helen had confirmed it before Dara left the terminal. The zipper panel would need to be repaired. The internal contents, as far as she had been able to assess through the window on the plane, appeared intact. It was, in the final accounting, a suitcase. She had other suitcases. She got up and walked to the window. Below, in the parking structure, a woman was loading groceries into the back seat of an SUV while a small child sat on the curb watching. An ordinary Tuesday in Chicago. Dara watched them for a moment. The woman's movements efficient and unhurried. The child picking at something on the pavement with focused interest. She thought about what she would say tomorrow. The press conference had been on the calendar since the acquisition was finalized. Nathan's communications team had drafted a statement. It was competent, clean, and entirely insufficient. She had rewritten it twice. The version she would deliver tomorrow was the third, and since she had mostly written it herself, in longhand, in a different hotel room 3 days ago, when she had been unable to sleep, and had found the only useful thing to do was to figure out exactly what she wanted to say, and why. It was not a victory speech. She had read too many of those, and they always sounded like the person delivering them had decided the story was over. The story was not over. It was at most a chapter. What she was going to say tomorrow was an accounting, not of grievances, of facts. What had happened, what it represented, what would change because of it, and what those changes would require. She was going to say it without anger, not because she wasn't angry, but because anger had a shelf life in rooms like that, and she intended to be heard long after the cameras had moved on. She had thought, at various points over the past year, about the versions of this morning that could have gone differently if she had been quieter, if she had not stood up when Rick dismissed her, if she had let the luggage go, let the comments go, kept her eyes on the window and her hands on her lap and said nothing. She could have arrived in Chicago with an unscuffed record. No confrontation on file, no conversation in that conference room. She could have walked out of this airport invisible. The acquisition would have gone through regardless. The press conference would still happen tomorrow. Nothing in the documents depended on what occurred on that flight. But she would have known, and the people who had spent the morning testing her composure would have gone home tonight, believing that what they had done was fine. She walked back to the bed and picked up the phone. Gina had sent a summary of the media outlets, already requesting comment. 14. By morning, that number would be larger. Dara typed back, see you at 7. We'll talk through the statement together. She plugged the phone in and went to the bathroom to wash her face. She stood at the sink and looked at herself in the mirror. The blazer was still on. She took it off and laid it carefully over the back of the desk. Tomorrow she would put it back on. She would walk out in front of the cameras, and the reporters, and the microphones, and she would say clearly, and on record, what kind of airline Apex Airways was going to be. She would say it as the majority owner. She would say it as someone who had been on that flight. But tonight she was just a woman in a hotel room at the end of a very long day, and that was enough. She turned off the bathroom light. The press conference room at Apex Airways headquarters in Chicago was full by the time Nathan stepped to the podium to open. 24 journalists, 4 cameras. a row of microphones taped together at the center of the podium stand. The corporate communications team had arranged everything in the cool, organized way that corporate communications teams always do. Banners with the airline logo precisely positioned, chairs set in measured rows, Waton glasses already poured. Dara stood behind the curtain to the right of the stage. Gina stood beside her with the tablet, murmuring last-minute briefing notes that Dara had already committed to memory. She listened anyway. It was something to do with her hands, while the rest of her was somewhere steadier. Nathan's voice carried through the curtain. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I'll keep my remarks brief and then hand the podium to Mitchell. She heard him describe the acquisition in the language of business. Majority ownership, controlling stake, effective date. The financial terms that had already moved across wire services at 6 morning. She had read the early headlines on the car ride over. Several had already included the phrase surprise acquisition. A few had leaned harder into the personal dimension. She had expected both. Nathan said her name. She walked out. The room was brighter than she had anticipated. The cameras adjusted. She reached the podium, set her hands on either side of the surface, and waited for the room to go fully quiet. It took about 4 seconds. Thank you for being here. She spoke without notes. She had done that deliberately. Notes made it a presentation. This was a conversation, even if only one person was talking. I want to begin with something that didn't appear in this morning's press release, she said. Yesterday, I was a passenger on Apex Airways Flight 14 from Atlanta to Chicago. I was traveling in first class. I want to tell you what that flight was like. The room shifted. A few pens moved. A camera adjusted its angle. She described it without performance. Check in. The ticket examined like evidence. The suitcase thrown. The gate, the boarding. The in-flight dismissals. One after another, each one small enough to explain away individually, accumulated into something that was not small at all. She described Rick telling her not to cause a scene. She described hearing Claire say nobody would lose sleep over it. She did not raise her voice once. This was not an unusual morning for me, she said. I have had mornings like it in airports, in office buildings, in conference rooms, and in hotels for the better part of 20 years. What was unusual about yesterday was that it happened on the day I was a majority owner of the airline where it happened. She paused. I am not here to perform anger. I am not here to announce revenge. I am here because what happened yesterday is not acceptable, and because the position I am standing in now gives me the ability to do something about it that most people who experience what I experienced are not in a position to do. A reporter near the center raised a hand. She acknowledged Mitchell. Can you confirm the 5 employees are suspended? Is termination on the table? That is subject to a full disciplinary review, she said. What I can confirm is that it is being taken seriously. Another hand. What specific changes are you committing to? She outlined all 3. The 3 years complaint data audit. The redesigned bias awareness curriculum. The redesigned bias awareness curriculum. The independent passenger reporting channel. She gave timelines. She named accountability measures. She did not use the word diversity because she had found that word used alone tended to mean was about to make a 2-minute video and consider the matter settled. A woman in the 3rd row asked the question she had been expecting. You mentioned you've experienced this before. Why didn't you act on the flight when it was happening? Dara was quiet for a moment. Because dignity doesn't need witnesses, she said. I knew who I was every step of the way. What I didn't have was a platform to make that knowledge matter beyond myself. She looked across the room. That's what changed. The room was still. I want to say one more thing, she said. This morning, there are people on flights all over this country who are experiencing exactly what I experienced yesterday. They do not own the airline. They do not have a press conference. They have a feedback card that goes to the same department as the person they're complaining about. She held the room. I am talking about this publicly and on record because those people deserve to know that someone with the ability to change the system has seen what they've seen and is going to do something about it. She stepped back. The applause came, and it was not polite. It was the sound of a room that had not been entirely sure what it was walking into and had just received something it recognized as real. Nathan joined her at the podium. They shook hands, and this time the cameras caught it. She did not smile for the cameras. She acknowledged Nathan and turned toward the edge of the stage. Gina met her at the curtain. Everything went well. They'll want follow-up statements by end of day. I know, Dara said. Let's take 15 minutes first. They walked through the back corridor, away from the cameras, away from the microphones, away from the room. A window at the end of the hallway looked out over the Chicago River, gray-green and moving fast in the November air. Dara stopped in front of it. She thought about the woman at check-in with her delayed smile, the man at the luggage belt who hadn't looked at her, the gate agent who had needed her to know he was suspicious, the attendant who had passed her row and handed a feedback card and turned away. She thought about all the versions of that morning that had happened on every flight, on every airline, in every city, before she had ever walked into this one. She thought about the people who had never gotten this moment and never would. Let's make it count, she said quietly. Not to Gina, not to anyone in the room. Just a promise made out loud to be kept. She turned from the window and walked back into the building. There was still work to do. There always was, and she had only just started.